How's your son doing?
Well,
Good. That's
he's
good.
doing good. All right. Limiting bandwidth so that way we don't have any issues with audio cutting.
Yeah, I just got a brand new. Yeah, I'll turn it down to low bandwidth.
That's what I did.
Okay, or very low. So I'll turn it to low. There we go. Boop. Okay, so we are live. Which is fine. Of course, I'll cut off some of the beginning stuff here. Trying to figure out if we ought to do. I'm Calvin, and I'm Justin. You're listening to Finding Truth. Something like that. I don't know. Together, we should say it in unison.
How about we not do anything corny and you just get us started and then we go? How about we not do anything that's going to get me absolutely harassed by the pastoral staff at my church? Okay.
Well, I do want there to be an intro or something. I don't want the intro to necessarily have to just be me. I want it to have more of and I don't want it to be corny, like you said. I want to say, hey, I'm Calvin. I'm Justin. And I'll just say, you're listening to Finding Truth. And that's pretty much it. But we'll do that. We can do that at the end.
Okay.
Okay. So, I guess we'll just go. So, hey, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning into our first episode of Finding Truth. I'm Cal.
And I'm Justin.
And so let's try that again. We'll just be a little bit quicker on the uptake there, I guess. Well, hey, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning into the first episode of Finding Truth. I'm Cal.
And I'm Justin.
And we're going to be focusing on apologetics. Apologetics is kind of the focus of this show. And so I guess in this first episode, in this inaugural episode, we're going to talk a little bit about who we are. We're not going to dive too deep into apologetics in this episode. We're going to talk a little bit about it. But just kind of want to introduce who we are, because in the past, we've done a few other podcasts here for the Christian Manifesto where there's been no backstory of the people who are involved. It's just, hey, they're involved and you know their voice, but you don't really know their story at all. And so when I approached Justin about doing this podcast together, I said, maybe it would be a good idea for people to know who we are, who they're listening to, what our story is. So actually, why don't you go first and tell people a little bit about yourself?
Well, I live in Michigan with my wife of 7 years. It'll be 8 years this year. We met at Rochester College, which is where Calvin and I became friends. Actually, we moved into the married housing room, not quite right in front of where Calvin was, but pretty close.
I was put in the married housing, but I was single because I was over 25 when I got to the school, and I guess they thought that if you're over 25, you can't live in traditional dorms because you would bite people who were younger than you, and so that's why I was in married housing. Justin was in married housing because he was actually married.
Because I was actually married. So
that's right.
So Calvin's little studio apartment was a home away from home, in which I got away whenever the wife and I argued, because it was a little studio, 350 square feet, something like that, apartment.
Yeah, but when you're arguing, it felt like 10 square feet
like
when you were arguing.
Well, yeah, because you had one person who would be mad at the other person sitting on the bed looking out the window, and then you have the other person sitting on the couch not 10 feet away watching the TV. You don't have a door to slam. You had that little accordion door thingy in our bathroom that you could slam, but there was no actual door. So if you wanted to slam a door, you either left the apartment or you went into the closet.
Nice.
But I mean, that's just kind of how that was. So, but that's where my wife and I met, and was at Rochester. And then at the time I was doing some ministry stuff, and I now have my undergraduate. I've got a bachelor's degree in biblical studies with a minor in biblical languages, and a master's degree from Liberty Baptist Theological Seminary in theological studies. I'm currently attending Liberty to acquire a doctorate of education in educational leadership. So Grew up in Buffalo. Enjoy the Buffalo Bills. I'm a glutton for punishment in that way.
Hey, Justin.
Mm-hmm.
We gotta start over. My network went out for a minute there, and I missed everything you said.
Okay, because I was gonna say because there was a little bit of like choppiness.
Yeah, there's some major choppiness. Well, I was on the wrong network. I just got a new. I got a new network router and all that jazz.
I'm guessing it's dual band, and you were on the 2G instead of the 5G.
Yep, that's exactly. That's really interesting that you knew that. So, yeah. So, Justin, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I live in Michigan with my wife of 8 years this year. We have a newborn boy that was born in February of this year. Wow. I'm already forgetting birthdays. Ooh. Good thing it's not my wife's birthday. I really would be in trouble. Yeah. That's August, by the way. See, I didn't forget that one. So we have a newborn boy, just doing ministry and working and going to school. And my wife and I met Rochester College, which is where Calvin and I met. We were in the married housing. Calvin was in the married housing, but he was not married. He was just old. So they decided to stick him in with the married people. And Calvin's place was kind of a place that I could go to whenever the wife and I were in an argument about something. You know, these apartments were 350 square feet and studio, so you were in one room. And you didn't have a place to go if you were angry other than out.
Pretty much it. So Justin and I watched quite a few episodes of Battlestar Galactica together. It was pretty cool.
Yes, we did. Yeah, Battlestar Galactica had epic conversations about Superman, which is a fascination and absolute obsession of both Calvin and I.
I mean, even though we both know that Batman is way, way better. Way better. I'm kidding.
I wish that this was not a podcast and you.
So it's funny. I just got a new router, and one network is called Metropolis, and the other one is called Gotham City. And the password for the Gotham City one is Batman sucks. So,
I would say, and please tell me Gotham is the 2G and not the 5G.
Oh, Gotham is definitely the 2G.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, yes. It's got to be the 2G.
Yeah, definitely 2G. So that's what I'm using my my iPhone and my iPad on. Definitely not my my gaming system or my computer, my laptop. So anyhow, we're nerding out here about comic books and apparently our networks. Anyhow, so yeah, we've known each other for years. We met in college. I mean, obviously, you've gone on. I think you went on to Liberty University, right? Liberty.
Yes. Yeah, I went on and got a master's degree in theological studies at Liberty.
Okay. So you're done with that, and you're married to Lisa, who also just got a degree at Liberty University as well.
Yep.
Like a couple weeks ago, right? I think.
Yeah, she walked 2 weekends ago. I think now. Yeah, 2 weekends ago with a master's degree. So.
Okay. Well, very cool. So now we're all kind of in the same boat. Although I didn't go to Liberty. And so you're involved in local church in your area.
Mm-hmm.
And so how are you involved there? What do you do there?
Oh, geez. Pretty much whatever they need me to. So I'm a licensed and ordained chaplain. And so I'll go make visits if they need me to, and go and teach or I go and preach at the jail few times a year, go to the homeless shelter up in Flint called Carriagetown Ministries, and do some preaching up there. Teach Sunday school, teach small group, I'm in the worship band. So pretty much a little of everything.
Okay. So that brings us up to speed on Justin. So I guess I'll tell you a little bit about who I am and what I do and what my pedigree is. My name's Calvin Moore. I go by Cal. And I have, for the last 7, almost 8 years now run a website called thechristianmanifesto.com, of which Finding Truth is a new podcast program for that website. Started that website just on my own, just kind of as a blog to review books and movies and music. It was a kind of a fun way for a college student to get free stuff. That was basically what I wanted. And record labels started sending me stuff, and so I started reviewing stuff. And then people came alongside me and said, "Hey, can I join you?" About 15, 20 people all around the United States, which is pretty cool, and around the world as well. And some people have come and gone over the years, and different programs have come and gone over the years. Because a lot of people that we originally had were like college students, like, "Oh, cool, free albums, I'll do it." And then we all graduated, and people, paired off, got married, had kids, things like that. And so people got busy, life kind of pressed in. But I've still been doing this for almost 8 years, 8 years now, the website at least. And now we've just kind of gone through some changes, and I'm focusing more on podcast programming, and then also building teams and casting vision for the site as the executive director. And so this is a new program because in addition to our Jacob Sessions podcast that we do, and then I also have my own show, the Cal Moore Show, where I often will interview authors and artists and sometimes movie stars and things like that. But this podcast is kind of a labor of love, because I have loved the topic of and the study of apologetics since I was in 10th grade. Apologetics was introduced to me by my high school French teacher, Miss Kadiriou. She introduced me to a little book called Evidence That Demands a Verdict, which was by a man by the name of Josh McDowell, who I would say is the godfather of Christian apologetics. He wasn't the first apologist by any means, and won't be the last, but definitely a household name within evangelical Christianity, that's for sure. And it was a smaller version of his larger book, which is called Evidence That Demands a Verdict, which I also now own, which is a fantastic book, a fantastic volume. But I guess that's kind of how I fell in love with apologetics. But ended up going to Rochester College, met Justin there, and majored in history, majored in Bible. So I got 2 undergrad degrees. Then I went on and got a master's degree in religious education from Rochester College as well. And I did that degree, and it was good, but I just kind of always felt like its focus really never talked about the why of belief. Just kind of, it just assumed belief and kind of went deep, and that's fine. It did go deep in certain ways, and it definitely changed me. But it never really answered the question for people: why does Christianity make sense? What is this all about? And we live in an increasingly secular culture where Christianity is kind of being pushed into the margins, and some people think that's where Christianity should be, and we can go round and round about that. But definitely being pushed out of the and in some ways, even the private sphere is being attacked. Like, you shouldn't believe this, you can't hold to that belief, it doesn't make sense. And so how do Christians answer the questions that our friends and our families and detractors and people who are scoffers, how do we answer questions about the Christian faith to these people? And so that's kind of how, I'm wired to kind of answer those questions. And then Justin teaching at my church, and one of those topics was apologetics, and I was like, dude, we got to do a podcast together. And over the last few weeks, Justin's like, man, I'm really getting excited when we're going to do this. And so I'm really excited to be doing this first episode. I hope, Justin, are you as excited as I am? Are you as excited?
I'm stoked.
You sound stoked.
Dude, it's ridiculous. My wife has been telling me to shut up about it for the last week.
It's funny though. It's funny because when you say I'm stoked, you sound like Ben's what's his name?
Ben Stein.
Ben Stein.
I'm so stoked, dude.
I'm so stoked. I'm so stoked.
It's ridiculous.
This is Justin.
This is me being excited.
So I guess we can share a little bit about the format of the show. Justin, you know what the format of the show is, so why don't you share with people what the format of the show is going to be?
Well, every show we're going to have a topic of discussion. So we're going to have something that we're going to focus on. It could be philosophical notion or a proof or a theological tenet or something that kind of holds Christianity together at a foundational level. And then we're going to discuss a current event or social topic through the lens of apologetics or theology, more than likely something that ties into the discussion that we just had in regard to that major theological topic that we had discussed, or apologetic topic. So it's one of those things where, we're kind of going to talk about it and kind of deal with it on a foundational level, and then we're going to bring it back to, okay, how does this actually apply to how we live our lives, and how do we use this, which is the reason for the current event.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's very important to do. Again, like you just hit the nail on the head there, because a lot of people will go into a class and they'll hear, all sorts of proofs and all sorts of theological constructs, and they'll hear all sorts of, philosophical musings and ideas. But then when they get out into the real world and they're flipping burgers, or they're, on the line, or they're at the soccer field with, their kids, they don't know how it really applies there. They don't know how it applies in everyday life. And so it's very important for us to not just say, hey, here's why Christianity makes rational sense. It's also important for us to say things like, and here's how it affects, this story. And here's how it affects, here's how Christians should think through these particular topics. And the interesting thing about apologetics, I find, is it asserts things. It assumes things to be true, and then it assumes other things to be false. And we live in this kind of day and age where it is not cool to say that anything is false, and it is definitely in vogue to say that everything is true. All things are true. All things are lawful. All things are expedient. Everything is okay. Throw caution to the wind. Your truth is your truth. My truth is my truth. Let's just call an ace and a spade, and that's it. But I don't think that people often know that aces are aces and spades are spades when they say those things. They're different things. And so they're all cards. They're both cards, right? But they're not the same thing. And so what is true is not the same thing as what is false. And it's crazy that people really think this way. They think, hey, you know what? All things are true. And I'm going, no, not all things are true. Right now I'm holding an iPhone. This iPhone is not a box of squirrels. That is a false statement about my iPhone. Now, I might be able to show you a really cute video on my iPhone of a box of squirrels, but a box of squirrels, my iPhone is not. And
no matter how badly you would like it to be, it is not a box of squirrels.
I don't know what I would do with a box of squirrels, to be honest.
Well, in the city of Detroit, in an apartment, probably call an exterminator of some sort.
I actually had a bat in my apartment a few weeks ago.
Which is gracious.
That was an interesting story.
I'm sure it was.
Anyhow, I don't even know where it came from.
Part of the problem is that people like to sing their kumbayas around the campfire and hold hands and act like everything's okay. And we're so anti-conflict in terms of philosophy and in terms of how we think about the world and the way it works. And we don't want to have these arguments with one another because we want to preserve relationship almost to a fault. And I think on some level, while, Christians have to be gentle and kind and merciful and humble, at the same time, Jesus said things like, I came to bring a sword. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword, to divide mother against father, father against son, and it's one of those things where the gospel is not a thing that is going to make peace all the time. Sometimes it's going to divide and make war. And a lot of Christians, for whatever reason, have a very kind of hippie view of who Jesus is, instead of viewing Jesus as he's described to us in the biblical text. I think some of that's because people are intimidated by the Jesus of the Bible, as they should be. I know I'm intimidated by him. But at the same time, that is the Jesus that lives and breathes and sits at the right hand of the Father. And it's no good for me to lie to myself about who Jesus is and try to create this concept that doesn't exist. than it is to just accept him for who he is and conform my life to that. So, I'm on that particular level. I mean, Kelvin and I will sit down and we'll just kind of scratch our heads. It's been almost a decade of us scratching our heads and looking at the world and going, why are people so crazy? Because we don't understand how they can hold these two tenets together at the same time. It doesn't make sense to us.
And I think that's really tough for people like us. I think because when I was younger, I was kind of that kid who asked a lot of questions, and I said, that doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense at all. How can you say this? I mean, even questions of the Bible, like the story of Noah and all the animals on the ark. I was like, wait a minute, hold on, how does that and that part of that drove my my study of Scripture, and it's really been interesting as I've met people over the years, people who don't believe in the Bible as the Bible being true and Jesus being the Son of God, all the way to people who Jesus as Lord and believe that the Bible is true, but still have kind of fashioned the Bible into what they want it to be. And I'm like, well, hold on, the Bible says this thing, but you're saying the exact opposite thing that Scripture says. And I'm not talking about things that are kind of open to interpretation and, hey, the culture was a little bit different. And so we need to really kind of understand those things and make sense of it for us today. I mean, I'm talking about things that are just like very, very blatant. You know what? I'm going to go do this. Wait a minute. Hold on. And so I've always kind of been this guy who questions and kind of kicks the tire. Far too many people, I think, don't. They say that they do, or they think that they do, or they have a deep thought every now and again that they'll post on Facebook. That's really generally not even an original thought. It comes from someone else because it's generally like a meme or something like that. But you have people who are actually unwilling to examine their lives. And I believe, I want to say that it was Socrates who said the unexamined life is not worth living. It was either Socrates or Plato. I'd have to look it up. Right? I should have better prepared for that statement. But the unexamined life is not worth living. And you have far too many people are living unexamined lives. They are influenced by culture around them, and so they've got ideas that aren't even their own, or they are influenced by parents and family and friends, and rightly so. You should be influenced by those people, but they don't examine those influences. And I've always kind of been a person who has said, I need to examine this. So even though I was raised in a Christian home, I was raised in a Pentecostal home, so we were in church more than anybody else. I'm sure my mom is in church right now somewhere. But even though I was raised in that, even though I inherited the Christian faith in ways that people would use as an accusatory thing, you're a Christian because you were raised a Christian. If you were a Hindu, if you were born in India, you'd be a Hindu. Even though I was raised in this, I always just had to examine it. And so I did examine other things. I examined Hinduism. I examined Buddhism. I examined atheism. It's much easier, in my opinion, to just be an atheist. Like, gosh, do you have any idea how difficult it is sometimes to live this Christian life? I mean, it's kind of antithetical to my natural desires. If I was an atheist, I could literally do whatever I want. Now, I know a lot of atheists will scoff at that and say, no, we don't do whatever we want. What I'm saying is I wouldn't be beholden to a God in the sky who gives me rules and regulations to follow that are for my good, of course. That's what I believe is it's for my good. But if I were an atheist, sometimes I think life would just be better because I wouldn't have to care about I might care about it, but I wouldn't have to care about it. So hopefully you're getting my point. But so I've examined these other viewpoints, and then of course I examined Christianity. I kicked its tires. I drove it around the block. I drove it on a cross-country trip. I brought it back, checked the oil, made sure everything was okay on it. I really truly examined this religion, and I have arrived at the conclusion that it is true. And that has taken years of apologetic studies, that has taken years of questioning, that has taken years of examining not just my own beliefs, but the beliefs of others. And so I think that this is very, very important for Christians to engage in. I believe that Christians need to have at least some understanding of apologetics. And so I guess we can kind of dive in just a little bit here as to, I mean, some of you might be wondering our apologetics, but it kind of goes back to 1 Peter 3:14 and 15, which of course is in the New Testament. And I got it right here. And what that says is, actually, I'll kind of back up to verse 13. This is, it says, "Now who is there to harm you if you are zealous for what is good? But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, no fear of them, nor be troubled, but in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect, having a good conscience, so that when you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame." And so apologetics comes out of that particular verse, a defense, always ready to give an answer for those who want to know, hey, why do you believe that? Aren't those fairy tales? Aren't those myths? Aren't those stories that were great? And, at a time when your parents were just trying to instill moral values in you, aren't they just kind of these tales, kind of like Grimm's fairy tales, to kind of give you and what to do wrong? That's where this comes in. We're supposed to give a reasoned defense of Christian belief. And so that's what apologetics is. Apologetics, plain and simple, is a reasoned defense of Christian belief that starts with a Christ as Lord. Now, we want to talk about, though, some things that Christian apologists are not. So, Justin, what are some things that Christian apologists are not?
Well, Christian apologists are not people who are going to suspend all their fundamental beliefs and values in order to investigate how reasonable it is to have them.
Okay, so what does that mean?
So that means we're not going to give up the presuppositions that kind of lay the foundation of our belief system. We're going to lay those on the ground and ignore them as we look at whether or not Christian faith has any kind of palpability. Okay, we're going to look at whether or not it's reasoned and it's illogical, and whether or not the arguments themselves make sense. And I think that's the thing that a lot of people in apologetics, especially in modern apologetics to a degree, have difficulty with, is that you'll have a conversation with someone in regard to what the Christian faith is, and they'll go from having a concept of, or having an argument or a discussion about a concept, to all of a sudden attacking Christians in particular. And that's divulging from the conversation, because now they're going after people instead of going after the concept. And the reality of it is, apologetics is not trying to reasonably defend the actions of people who are still sinful, which is what Christians are. It's the defense of the Christian faith, its doctrines, its theologies, its tenets of belief, and the philosophical worldview that we believe Scripture teaches. And that is what we are to defend, are those concepts and those ideas. So when we get to a point to where someone begins to have that conversation with us in regard to, well, Christians did this and Christians did that, you kind of have to put your hand up and go, well, that's divulging, because now we're not dealing with concepts, now we're dealing with people. And, if you're going to say that Christianity isn't logical, then you have to make that argument. And a Christian was mean to me one time doesn't make that argument.
Right. And that's interesting. So in a few weeks, actually, when we kind of start diving, I'm actually going to talk about kind of the tactics of how you can start to have conversations with people, how you deal with when you're trying to talk about a particular concept, you're trying to talk about a particular philosophy, you're trying to talk about a particular idea in regards to the Christian faith and why it's reasonable. And then somebody wants to say, well, what about the Crusades? And, what about, priests molesting little children? And what about this, Christian who treated me like garbage when I was in high school? What about all those things? Have the conversations and steer the conversations so that you're kind of always in a you basically always have the higher ground. Essentially, you always have the higher ground in the conversation. Not saying that you're a better person than the person you're having a conversation with, but more often than not, a lot of people don't want to have the conversation that forces them to actually think about the ideas that they're holding on to, and so they'll bring up everything that they possibly can to keep from having this actual conversation. C.S. Lewis in his book Mere Christianity actually talked about that, where he said it's really like a child trying to keep from learning its sums. A child is having a difficult time learning math, and so they start to act up. And the teacher has to guide the student back to, okay, look, we're not going to talk about that. We're not going to play around. We're going to focus on 2 + 2 = 4. That is what we are here to do. And so that's really something that we're going to focus on here in a few weeks. But another thing that apologists do is we show that the Christian faith is consistent with rational and critical thinking about Christian claims. Both faith and reason are valuable Christian resources. And the reason that we want to show that, or the reason that apologists show that, is because a lot of people, especially one of the main criticisms of the faith, of Christian faith, of any faith in general, especially by the new atheists, is that Christianity, belief in God, belief in a higher power, is in fact unreasonable. That is often the language that you're going to hear in regards to people who believe in God. Generally, again, like Justin said, they may be talking about religion in general, but they're often going to immediately turn their sights to Christianity in particular. Case in point, Bill Maher. He is one of the big guys who does that. He talks about religion in general, but then he really, really, really hates Christianity. If you've ever seen his documentary, Irreligulous, or it's Religulous, I'm sorry, it's just Religulous, trying to show that religion is ridiculous, but then he focuses primarily on the Christian faith. And so what we want to do, what apologists do, our job is to show that Christian faith is consistent with rational and critical thinking. A lot of people don't think that. They think in order to be a Christian, in order to believe in God, in order to believe in Jesus, in order to go to church, in order to raise your hands and sing praise and worship songs to this guy you can't see, all of that requires checking your brains at the absolutely does not. And so that's another thing that that apologists do. And then what's the last thing that we do, Justin?
Okay, so the last thing that we do is evidences employed by apologists do not presuppose the truth of Christian claims. That is circular reasoning. Instead, a Christian apologist is a committed Christian who is motivated by his commitment to engage in rational and critical thinking about Christian worldview in order to show that it is reasonable to adopt it. Did you just say that?
Did I just say that?
You kind of did.
Okay, so we'll back up. Hold on. Additionally, something people should know is that, so we're offering these evidences, right? So Justin and I, over the next few weeks and months and hopefully years, we offer these evidences. This is reasonable to believe, but evidences themselves, they don't presuppose the truth of Christian claims, right? Just because we say it doesn't make it true. That would be circular reasoning. It's like, well, why is that true? Because it's true. That doesn't make any sense. Instead, what we do, Christian apologists, again, we don't check our brains at the door. We don't drop our beliefs in order to examine our beliefs. A Christian apologist is already a committed Christian. They're motivated by his or her commitment to engage in rational and critical thinking about the Christian worldview in order to show that it's reasonable to adopt it. We want other people to see, hey, this makes sense. This makes sense of the world as it comes to us. So when you're seeing stories, evil perpetrated all around the world, when you see stories of people beheading people in other countries, when you hear of terrorist attacks, when you hear of parents neglecting their of people doing good things for others, feeding the poor, clothing the naked, taking care of the fatherless and the widow. The Christian worldview makes sense of all of that. Other worldviews, hopefully, we will show as this show progresses that other worldviews don't answer the questions of the world as they come to us. They don't make sense of the world as they come to us. They try. They definitely try. But I believe, and Justin believes, and Christian apologists believe, and Christians in general believe that those worldviews don't answer the biggest questions of life adequately. That's what Christian apologetics is. But what does Christian apologetics do? What does it accomplish? So we're gonna kind of go over a few things here as to what Christian apologetics accomplish and what does it do.
Well, it gives reasons for thinking that the core claims of the Christian worldview are true. So it comes from on a foundational level. It shows that the worldview of Christianity really does explain the real world that we live in. It's not just some manifested concept or idea of what the world is, but it is the honest to goodness world that we live in. That's what Scripture is meant to kind of talk to us about. So what we're trying to do is we give reasons for thinking that the core claims of what we see in the world every day is true.
Okay. So another thing that I've seen, another thing that I think that Christian apologetics does, what it accomplishes, is it argues that objections to the Christian faith, to the Christian worldview, they don't succeed in showing that it's unreasonable or false. I have sat in more college classes. Hold on one sec. Oh, the power of editing.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, right.
We should probably just start that again because I had a dog back here drinking really loud.
Okay.
I could hear it. So
I didn't hear
that
I didn't hear it.
I'm sure you'll hear it when you do the editing. You'll hear
it. Okay, so that's what Christian apologists are all about. That's what Christian apologists do. But what does Christian apologetics itself do? So, so Justin, what do you think? What are some things that you think Christian apologetics does or accomplishes?
Well, it gives reasons for thinking that the core claims of the Christian worldview are true. So basically what it does is it gives us a foundational level and gives us some very easy ways in which to look at the world that we live in and look at the Christian worldview and say, hey, these two are the same. They match. They look exactly the same. This explains this. And what's interesting is that there are times where even the Christian worldview will explain the things that don't make sense in a way that makes sense and doesn't make sense at the same time, because the world that we live in a lot of times is a world where things seem to happen for no good reason. When evil is perpetuated in the world, what was that school shooting that happened in 2012? What was that called? The Connecticut.
Sandy Hook.
Sandy Hook. So when Sandy Hook happened, that was that the Christian worldview can answer as to why that occurred. Why did that happen? Where does that come from? How can someone be so evil? The Christian worldview can answer that. Other worldviews can't really answer that kind of question in a satisfactory way, which is what the core claim of the Christian worldview kind of works from. I'm gonna kill him. Dude. I'm gonna kill him.
It's okay. Your dog doesn't know you're recording. Your dog's being a dog. Okay, so another thing that one of the things that I noticed then is that one of the things that Christian apologetics accomplishes, it argues that the objections against the Christian worldview don't actually succeed in showing that it's unreasonable or false. Because I mean, a lot of times, I get into discussions, again, I've already kind of alluded to this, where people say, well, what about the Crusades? And what about this, that, and the other? And, if you were born in India, you would have been a Hindu. And, I like Hinduism, or I like Buddhism, or I'm Muslim. And here are our arguments against Christianity. And so what I think apologetics does, the job of apologetics, one of the main jobs of apologetics, is to argue that those objections that people have and the claims against Christian worldview, they don't succeed in showing that it's unreasonable or false. They might provide a very good challenge to the Christian worldview, but they don't show that it's false, which I think is the main thing. You have to be able to show a worldview false in order to shatter that worldview. I think Christianity actually does show that other worldviews are false. That doesn't mean that those worldviews and those world religions don't still exist. I think people, when they are faced, though, with the reality that what they believe is false, when they're faced with that shatters that within them, and they are now forced to make a decision, to make a choice about, do I continue to stay with this because it makes me comfortable, which we'll talk about in the next episode, or do I abandon this and search out and seek for that which is true in this world? And so I think that's another thing that Christian apologetics accomplishes.
And one of the other things that Christian apologetics accomplishes is it gives reasons for thinking that the claims of worldviews that are logically inconsistent with a Christian worldview, such as naturalism and many of the other claims of Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, are unreasonable or false. So I think you kind of covered that in the last one where you talked about that a little bit, Kelvin. But I think what we need to really focus on is that Christianity, what apologetics does is it looks at all the other worldviews around it, and it says, this gives us the best answers that actually answers all of the questions and leaves the smallest gaps of reason. Whereas then all of these other worldviews leave gaping holes where Christianity gives answers to. And so it really is, apologetics is not just a defense of the Christian faith, but it's also making a case for the Christian faith being more comprehensive in scope in comparison to other worldviews, whether they be philosophical or they be religious.
Okay. I'm going to edit all this so it's going to sound more conversational. But, I think the last thing that Christian apologetics accomplishes is that it argues that the arguments given for the claims of alternative worldviews, that the ones that are inconsistent with Christianity, they don't succeed in showing that those alternative worldviews are true. So people will argue, hey, here's why I believe in Baha'i. Here's why I believe in Islam. Here's why I believe in Judaism. Here's why I believe in Hinduism. Here's why I believe in Buddhism. Here's why I believe in fill in the blank, or don't believe. Here's why I don't believe in anything. Here's why I'm a new atheist, right? That's why I'm an atheist. I don't think that arguments, and this is what apologetics does, it accomplishes, it shows that the arguments that people give for those worldviews don't show that those worldviews are true. More often than not, people will claim that Christian arguments for the veracity, the truthfulness of the Christian claims, that they're circular. But I find the more and more that I kind of take the roof off of people's arguments, and the more and more that I lead the conversation, the more and more that I control where this conversation is going, the more I find out that the reasons that people have for their own worldviews, generally worldviews that are not really well thought out. They're generally often based in hurt feelings or something that they heard a professor say, and they didn't want to feel stupid for holding on to the faith that they inherited because everybody else in the class is trying to get an A, and they want to get an A, and they don't want to look stupid by saying, hey, I do believe in Jesus, I do believe in the Bible, when their professor says, God is dead. I think that none of these arguments really show they are, in fact, the arguments that are more often than not, circular. And so that's what Christian apologists do. That's what Christian apologetics accomplishes. And so that's kind of where we want to end this particular episode. We didn't want to dive too deep in. We didn't want to start off just assuming that everybody knew what apologetics was. Kind of to define the terms of what it is we're going to be doing, what it is we're going to be focusing on. And so from here, things are going to be a little bit more conversation here. This week is kind of a little bit more textbook, a little bit more dry. But next week, we're going to kind of look at the Christian worldview as is Christian. We're going to ask the question: is Christianity a consumer product? Is religion a consumer product? Or Christianity or religion a of all of life? And so I think you can kind of already know our answer to that question, but we kind of want to tell some stories and then look at how people approach those kinds of things as those two things in the coming weeks. So thank you so much for tuning into our first episode. If you want to email us questions, you can email us at findingtruthpodcast@thechristianmanifesto.com. It's a really long email address, but again, that's findingtruthpodcast@thechristianmanifesto.com. So thanks so much for listening. I'm Cal.
And I'm Justin.
And we'll see you next week.